You're watching Divorce Shield Live, the weekly show for men who are thinking about going through or recovering from divorce. My name is John Knocklinger. I am a men's divorce coach, and I'm also a recovering divorce attorney. I'm the founder of Divorce Shield, a company exclusively devoted to helping men plan for and navigate divorce. You can find out more about us at mensdivorcenetwork.com, where you can also join a completely free group where you can speak with other men who are going through a divorce, ask questions, and get support. Today, my guest is Jeremy Davis. Jeremy went through a divorce himself, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the process that he went through, what it's like co-parenting a child post-divorce, and let us know what he would have done differently if he could do it all over again, which I know he doesn't want to do. He was married for about a year, but he was together for 7 years, which is with his ex-wife, which is obviously something I would like to get into a little bit. He has one son who is 5 years old, and he is in sales, but we're not going to really talk about his job today. We're going to talk more about the divorce and what he went through. Thank you so much for being here today, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah. So let's start with the fact that you were with your ex-wife for 7 years and married for a year. What happened, Jeremy?
Yeah, it's so funny. You put it in writing and it really begs the question. And I don't have a great answer. What I'd highlight is that we met really young. We met in middle school, and most of our relationship throughout our life was based on a friendship. Middle school, high school years together, lots of parties, socialization, but never any formal dating, just a good friendship. We decided to go to the same college by coincidence. We didn't plan that together. And it wasn't until that point that we started dating, dated all through college, moved in together after college, and continued up to the point of marriage. But to answer that, in hindsight, as I look back, and I share this with people in my network, I felt in my experience that the divorce itself put a lot of pressure on us. And if you look at that timeline, we're together for 6, 7 years, and then we're married for a year before it all falls apart. I don't know that that had everything to do with it, but it is to say that I think the marriage put some pressure on us.
So when was your son born?
He was born after our marriage, so he was planned. That was part of our goal in getting married, was to start a family. And I think that's speaking to the pressure. I think as I look back on it, after Mason was born, we realized that it was no longer just about the life we had built together up to that point. It was about a lot more, and so differences started coming out from there. But yeah, Mason was planned. We were married in 2016. He was born very shortly after.
So how long or how old was he, I guess, whenever you started the divorce process?
Yeah, he was an infant, so he must have been a max of 6 months when the process started.
Okay. So let's see which one of you is the one that sort of initiated the entire divorce process?
Yeah, I was the stereotypical hurt guy. I did not want to get divorced. I did not initiate that process, and I made it clear, and I still do to this day. It's not something I'm ashamed of. That I wish it worked out. I wished we could have found a way to make things work, but wasn't meant to be. She filed for divorce to initiate the process.
Why did she tell you she wanted a divorce?
I'm so happy you asked, because there's no red herring, as they use in the legal world. There was no smoking gun for us. And I think a part of that is the reason I struggled with it so much. There wasn't any concrete reason. A lot of people would say, yeah, we should call it quits. It snowballed over an argument about taxes. Go figure. That was obviously not the reason we ended up divorcing, but that was the argument that started it all and surfaced a lot of deeper issues that we had. And a lot of our early arguments as a pre-marriage into married couple were financial, so that wasn't too surprising.
How old were you when you got married?
I was 25, and she's 9 months older, so she was 25 as well. So married and divorced very young, which we both knew.
Yeah, getting married in your 20s before you have a career and all those things is so difficult. Now, money wise, did you guys talk about your perceptions of money and taxes and all those things before you got married, or is this something you just didn't and then it sort of reared its ugly head?
We did not, and that is a huge lesson to me in relationships in general, even before marriage. But getting that stuff out there, how you treat money, your expectations and goals, what that looks like together in dating, we didn't do any of that. And so, no, we had no basis to understand where the other person was coming from. To dive a little deeper into that point on taxes, it was about claiming our newly born infant son and who that would go to. And as a married couple, in my opinion, it didn't matter, but it was important to her. And since we had never discussed that, we were arriving at it in a heated debate as opposed to kind of some understanding of it.
Did she have a career when you guys got married?
She did, yeah. She was working for a dermatology office, a medical receptionist. I wouldn't say career, but she had done that throughout college to pay for college and then stayed there after. So she was full-time medical receptionist. So we were dual income. I was also working at the time. It was my first sales role out of college. So we had financial stability, but I would also add, John, that as a young couple, we were terrible money managers, and that reared its ugly head so many times throughout our relationship. And again, it caused a lot of arguments.
Well, Jeremy, I see plenty of people who are in their 40s and 50s that are bad at managing money too. Money is the number one reason people get divorced, which most, if you ask people out in the world, they think adultery is the number one reason for divorce, and it's not. It's money. So what you went through is not uncommon whatsoever. So you got married young. You've known her for a very long time, and you had this kid together. So when you started going through this divorce process, how were the discussions about custody and who your son would be with and when?
Yeah, this is where it really began to get ugly. So it was heated from that argument over taxes, and obviously deeper issues surfaced as we continued that argument. She left. She ended up saying, "I've had enough. I'm going to leave." So we separated at that point and weren't sure exactly which direction it was going to go in. Um, and I'm sorry, John, bring me back to your initial question there. I lost my train of thought.
Absolutely. When you started going through the divorce, and I mean, you had an infant child, which are the most difficult custody disputes anyway. I'll be very generic and say that in a lot of cases, women believe that they should have, an infant almost all of the time. I frequently see those comments like, oh, he doesn't even know how to change a diaper or feed or any of that kind of stuff. So I can only imagine that it was not easy discussing custody of your then infant son. So I guess just tell us a little bit about how did you guys, how did the discussions go? Did they get heated? And how did you ultimately get to a place where you could have an agreement? And do you still have that same agreement, or did it change?
Yeah, and that's why I had started there. It was already heated. She left on that note. And no, all the points you made, John, are completely true. I'm a new father at that point, my first experience with an infant. And so, yes, I heard all those same things that the baby should be with me. That was her stance. That was her family stance. And a part of me didn't entirely disagree, but fully disagreed on not having access or the ability to spend time with my son. And that's where it really starts to hurt, and that's where the pain in the process starts. So yes, right from the gate, the minute that she left after that argument and we're formally separated trying to figure things out, my focus shifts to when can I see our son, how long can I see him, and I made zero, next to no progress on my own there. I was allowed over to her family's house for dinner, so it wasn't that I didn't see him. The problem with that, John, became I was walking into a hostile environment, for lack of a better term. It wasn't quality time with my son. It wasn't my own time. I had watching eyes around me. So yes, I did see Mason, but I stayed as patient as I could with that process. At this point, I'm also trying to determine if we have a chance at solving things, if she might come home, if we're really going to go the full route. And it seemed that way. So to get to how I got custody, it became very clear. My patience wore thin, and it kept wearing thin, and it became very clear that I wasn't getting anywhere by asking. And so at a certain point, I don't recall when, it was clear I needed to get counsel. I got an attorney. She had an attorney, and so that's where the conversation started. But to speak generally, we made no progress on our own because of the points you made. In her mind, I should not have our infant son on my own at that point.
Did that mentality ever subside, or does it still go on now?
It completely subsided. We have a very functional, I'd almost call it a positive co-parenting relationship. It's definitely not perfect, and we can revisit that. But it subsided. It just took time. And John, it did not subside until this divorce process, which went on for about 2 years, maybe a little less, was over. So it was pretty much bad blood throughout all of that, and it was a dogfight on both sides. And if I may add, I don't think any of that was necessary, and my ex-wife would agree with me on that today, which is great. But yeah, it was 2 years. We didn't see eye to eye. Our lawyers hashed it out.
I think most people, when they look back at their divorce, if it was long and cost a lot, would say the same thing. Were her parents part of the push for her to get custody, or was this all her?
Yeah, they were entirely part of the push, and I'm always cautious to put too much blame on them or anybody else. It was between her and I, but you have to acknowledge those outside factors. And it's her family; she loves them, she respects them, but they were not helpful to me in this. And it's not a question of who they should be helping. It's her grandparents' mother. They're going to side with her, so I understand that. The challenge that I had was they were so involved throughout the whole it was essentially not just me speaking to my ex-wife about these issues. It was me speaking to all of her family, who each had slightly different perspectives and were slightly different people. In reality, I just needed to be talking to her, so that became very frustrating. But yes, I think that, you know, it's over. It doesn't matter. We may have had a chance to resolve some things if she had a little pressure removed from her family at that time. But she acknowledges too that her family made an active push to kind of see things to the end there.
Did you ever have a talk with her about, can you please just ask your family to kind of back away so we can try to resolve this? I mean, is that something you guys ever talked about?
A number of times, yeah. And even when I would go over for those dinners, I would say that directly. I'm happy to come. I'm happy to see Mason, to chat with you guys about whatever, but I'd prefer to not discuss these issues as it relates to custody, the divorce with you, only because it really is Lindsay and I. So I did try, and even to this day, they're still very active. They love our son very much, so they're involved in his life in varying degrees. But yeah, their opinions still do play a role to this day.
How long was it before you were able to have Mason at your house by yourself without someone watching you?
Yeah, I don't remember. It was too long. I don't remember exactly how long, but I would be comfortable saying it was at least 3 to 4 months from the time she leaves. We're separated. It's 3 to 4 months before Mason is on my own. And the reason for that, I guess, in her eyes was, and in a lot of mothers' eyes who are going through this, is they want some formal agreement in place, times, dates, understanding of how the baby's coming home. So it wasn't until I had some official document between our lawyers. It wasn't a full custody stipulation, but some understanding of visitation that had been struck and signed.
Did she have anything in there about, making sure you actually fed Mason, or, did she put anything else in there besides just when you were going to have him and how you were to bring him back?
It was I don't think there was stuff about feeding, and you can count if there were things that from a rules perspective could have been added, they would have been. That was how contentious it was at that time. So I'd have to look. I do recall it was so brief, John. This was frustrating too. He's 6 months old. He's an infant. He's at that time formula. So I do believe it was some note about feeding, but it was like a 2 hour visit, if I recall correctly. It was like 6:30 when I got done work, maybe even less, an hour, and then I drove him home. So I was almost defeated by these visits. Of course, I took them because it was my opportunity to see my son and get that time I had been asking for. But an hour with it was more a formality at that point than it was anything else. I got to give him a bottle, give him a hug, burp him, and then I'd be taking him home.
Ugh, it's so hard to hear.
Yeah, it was
Well,
rough.
yeah, I mean I have an 8-year-old. I was thinking always when I'm talking to anyone who went through a divorce when their kids were infants. I mean, your story is very common. Unfortunately, it's very common. Did you reach an agreement with her for those 2-hour blocks, or was that something imposed on you by the court?
It was not. It was an agreement between her and I. And when I say her and I don't think she would have agreed to anything. She's following the direction of her lawyer, so it was really our lawyers. But that's us. So we reached that without a judge or any type of sign off. And this is before any of the formal arbitration, the full process. My lawyer made a that was my first priority after the separation. That was where my mind shifted, was I need to be able to get away from having to visit on her terms and have Mason on my own. And so I made that push with my lawyer. I forget how that was done, but I do recall some document was drafted up and signed which outlined those times.
All right. Well, let's go to your lawyer for a minute. I'm always curious how people find their attorneys and whether or not you think you made a good choice.
Yeah. So I found my attorney. My dad got referred to somebody in Center City who was just, phenomenal attorney, but not realistic in terms of where I was. So that person referred us to a place in Norristown, and I couldn't speak highly enough about my experience. Now, with the caveat that none of this is positive, it's a lot of money. You're not happy to be in this, so of course you'd prefer to never have to even speak about it. But in terms of representation, support, results, the firm I used was amazing. My lawyer herself really guided me through that process well.
You don't have to answer if you don't want to, but how much did this whole thing cost you?
Oh yeah, I honestly couldn't even. I'm happy to answer. I don't have a precise number. I was a younger guy, so I admittedly was leaning on help where I could, and I took the brunt of it on my own. I'd estimate, John, out of my own pocket, at least $15,000, at least, at
Okay.
least, and more than that, realistically, when I think about what else went into it.
Yeah, I mean, you guys were married for a year, and really it was just a custody case.
Yeah, no marital assets. It should have been very simple.
It's just amazing to me. It's just amazing to me. This is why something I advocate very frequently is for people just to bypass the attorneys and go right to a mediator and try to sit down and have these conversations. Because the second there's two attorneys involved, and I say this as an attorney, the second there's two attorneys involved, the case will cost more. It just will, for a variety of reasons. So, I know it's difficult. Whenever you start a divorce, most people, their first instinct is, I need to go get an attorney on either side. And once one person has an attorney, the other one feels like they need an attorney. And that's kind of how things go. And so I've been trying to make sure people know that that is not the only way you can do this. You can agree, listen, let's not spend 15, 20, $25,000, whatever it ended up being, to fight for a period that was longer than our marriage. I see that frequently too, Jeremy. You were going through a divorce for 2 years and you were only married for 1 year, which, I mean, I think we all can agree that is silly, silly, silly.
Yep.
So your attorney and her attorney were negotiating. When was it that you started to get more than 2 hours, these little 2-hour windows where you could just, feed and burp your son?
Yeah, I'm trying. That's a good one. I'm trying to think when there was so many moving parts to this process, and all I wanted was light at the end of the tunnel. And by the time we got there, it was a miracle. But to that end, I would say that we were doing that very limited schedule for about the first 4 months. It wasn't until, I believe you had said it was a mediation step, and we had attorneys, but it was some formal step in court where we actually drafted our next custody stipulation as opposed to a visitation schedule. And what that did was it gave me the days that I have today, so it was more like a 50-50. And to give you a sense, today I have my son every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Tuesday and Thursday, I get him after work around 6. I have him through that night until the next morning, and then I drop him off the next day with his mom. Saturday, I have him all day into Sunday, the next day. And this schedule, it's every other day. It's not optimal anymore as he's getting older. It was built on him being an infant. So back to your question, John, we did that limited visitation one, and then they built it up to this Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. But since Mason was an infant still at that time, it wasn't overnights. That was the next big fight that I had to kind of push through, was overnights. And that took a long time. And it was all those points you made that, like, again, it's his first kid. He doesn't know what he's doing. Just all those common arguments you'll hear.
Which is funny because it was her first kid too, right?
Yeah. Yes, it was.
Right. So you now have this every other day situation, which, by the way, I do think when kids are very young, like infants, that is actually the best schedule, because that way they see each parent almost every day. But 5-year-old, I've actually never heard of a 5-year-old having this kind of schedule. I'm assuming he's not in kindergarten yet, right?
He's not. Yeah. So COVID took a part in that. He's also, and I'm happy to share this, I saw it actually as I was cruising through the podcast selections. We have him being evaluated for an IEP, individualized education plan. And so all of that to say, he's not starting school this year. And so the schedule still works. To your point, though, it is totally built for infancy, that frequency of seeing each parent. And that's where we're at now. And a new challenge that I have is revisiting that schedule on a positive note, but making changes. And it is very difficult, even if we get along, to get agreement to actually plan and execute on a schedule change. So it is something I've been pushing for recently, is a change to this schedule. Even if it was something like Tuesdays, Thursdays, and every other full weekend, I think now it's more about not the frequency of the visits, but the quality and length of them. So I'd like to change that at some point.
Now, is that something you've proposed to her, this Tuesday, Thursday, and every other weekend?
I have a number of times, yeah.
And what is her response?
She agrees with it. She seems to agree with it. She seems okay with it. It's just a matter of that execution. And she has a lot. Her life has changed a whole bunch in the time since, and so it's different for her now. She has 2 daughters, twin daughters, happened post-divorce. So her life's different. She's got constraints on her side. That being said, again, it's positive now. I think it's something I could make happen. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of persistence, very much like my job. And, sometimes that wears you down. The reason it starts to get a little scary is you start to worry that, are we only capable of coming to formal agreements or executing on these things when other people tell us we have to? And that's what we're trying to avoid. So I hope to do a schedule change without needing any help from the law or an attorney or a judge.
Yeah, well, you don't. I mean, that's anytime you making a change to the schedule, you don't need anybody. In fact, if you two just write something up and you both just sign it, you don't even have to send it to the court. I mean, obviously, the court's just there to make sure people's rights aren't trampled on, and fathers can actually see their kids and whatnot. But it's a misnomer. I think the way you're thinking is absolutely right. It's a misnomer that you have to get the court involved anytime you want to change your schedule. You don't. But on the flip side, you probably want to get this thing rolling soon, just because this only Saturdays every weekend. I mean, that really puts a crink in your ability to actually take your son and go do things for an entire weekend. As he gets older, he's going to want to do that. So, I mean, what is your time frame here? Are you trying to get this done soon, or just before he starts school, assuming he starts school next year?
Yeah, I've been I'd say about 3-4 months ago, I made a real push, and I do this strategically. I try to plan, things are smooth and going well, and I feel comfortable that it will be received well, and it was. Again, it just comes to like getting that execution. But yeah, that was the way I framed it to my ex-wife, was just that. It was everything you had said. Like, look, every Saturday doesn't necessarily work for me anymore. I have a girlfriend. I'd like to be able to spend time with both of them, with just her, but it's almost like dividing your weekend in half. And she agreed. So she was okay with that. But more importantly, with school starting, yes, this schedule will not work for Mason, who's the most important subject, once he's on a school schedule. So it's going to have to be changed in some fashion. When we get to that point, yes, I'm trying to get ahead of that where it works for Mason, most importantly, and then also balances my schedule as well.
How close do you live to his mother?
Following the divorce, I stayed in the same apartment that we had. She had went home. I'm in the same county today, but I am further, about 20 minutes from them. So it's 40 minutes round trip. Not too bad, but it's about as far as I'd want to be, I'd say.
In what state were you in when you got divorced?
Pennsylvania.
All right. So this divorce process went on for almost twice as long as you were married.
Yeah.
As you're sitting here looking back at it, why do you think it went on for so long?
Yeah, it's all of those points that I highlighted about it being contentious from the jump, and more so the family push. I think what it really, without trying to speculate too much, it really was a play for custody of Mason more than it was a divorce for me. I think we could have had a clean break, a clean divorce, because again, no marital assets. We're married such a limited amount of time. I think she was under the impression that she would have more rights than I would as a mother. And I think she got some bad advice, whether it was family or her attorney or legal advice along the way. Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, where we reside and where this process went, is very pro dad, which is great. I'm sure a lot of courts are, but especially here. And so I knew from everything I was being told from my legal counsel that I was going to have nothing less than 50-50. So I was prepared for that. And she just couldn't get comfortable with that. That seems to be why if I had to boil it down, it was bad legal advice or the wrong assumptions that she was entitled to more custody than she was.
Well, that happens quite frequently.
Yeah.
Whether it's the attorney or friends or family, people get these wild ideas about what is or is not going to happen.
Yeah.
A lot of it is sort of institutional, and from the standpoint of it used to be that mothers always got custody of young children. That's what it used to be, but it's 2021, and you're right. Not just in the county where you got divorced, but most of the Northeast and the West. The South is a little bit different. There is more of a movement towards this 50-50 time sharing between mom and dad. But I think what's important, and I think the reason I asked you about where you live, is people have to be realistic, though. I see a lot of people that just want that mathematical 50-50 time, and they kind of don't think about what the impact on the child's going to be to, have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and drive 45 minutes to get the kid to school. Like, people really aren't fair to children. And I'm glad to hear you say several times, we got to come up with a schedule that's good for Mason. And that's how you have to always look at it, is what's good for the kid. I mean, obviously you want as much time as possible, but guess what? If you can't have, 50-50 time because you live too far away, what do you have a choice? You can move closer, so that you can do it. But, don't get too caught up on, I have to have this exact amount of time. It's quality and not quantity, right? And that's exactly why these little 2-hour windows that I'm glad you got rid of very quickly. Because, Jeremy, I've seen people who deal with that for like a year or two. And, you know how status quos work. The second you get something going and it becomes status quo, it gets harder and harder and harder to get away from that, because her beliefs might have gotten, a little bit more concrete about, well, he's able to handle this, but he wouldn't be able to handle more than this. Because I hear that kind of nonsense all the time, too. Anyway, you'll appreciate this, Jeremy. Whenever I have a guy who is a dad of a very young child, I just lose my mind in court whenever I hear, like, if your ex-wife's attorney had said those things in court, I lose my mind, because I had a child not that long ago, and contrary to popular belief, men can take care of infants like we can. Like
Absolutely.
I know it's everyone thinks about, how things were back in like the 1960s and 50s and 70s, where, there was a state, mom was stay at home almost in every household and dad was out there working. It's just so different now. And it's really interesting. Most of the time that this happens, it's almost always driven by the parents. Almost always, because I mean, we've all grown up in a different world. I mean, I don't know about you. I don't know if your parents both worked, but mine did. I mean, it wasn't like, you didn't have more of a connection to mom or dad. So I'm hoping we're almost past this point where people have to actually worry how much time they're going to get with their kids. But I really, really like the fact that you were persistent, and even though you didn't want the divorce, um, you apparently came to the conclusion it's happening whether I like it or not. And I have this child. This is what, our marriage produced, this child, and I'm going to make the best of it as possible. So you have moved on. You have a new girlfriend. Are we open to getting married again, or did that one marriage kind of sour everything for you?
I'm happy you asked that. It's funny dating post divorce to see my evolution on this question. And generally speaking, my answer today is I remain in a place where I'd be reluctant, or at least reluctant to do so quickly without having been with that person for a long time. But as I've been with my girlfriend longer, we even have conversations. She's also recently divorced, so similar background, similar experience, and also is sort of anti-marriage right now too. But you acknowledge that life changes. I mean, if I look where I am today versus where I was 4 years ago and 4 years before that, the things I would tell you 4 and 4 years before are probably nothing like they sound today. And so I'm always reluctant to say I would never do something. I am not looking to jump right back into marriage. I am looking, and what I do prioritize is my happiness. I've found that for now, and I see where that takes me. But I think, John, as I get further from the divorce and that experience, I'd say that if I find the right person, I'd probably be inclined to keep an open mind when it comes to it.
Yeah, I mean, that's all you can really do. I will tell you, I see it very frequently that when people get divorced, they end up getting into relationships with other people who were divorced. I don't know if there's just some kind of a, magnetic attraction that happens, or whether it's, those shared experiences, or whether you just know that, okay, we both know what it's like for a marriage to fail. So hopefully we're both going to be a little bit more careful about getting into this marriage. I just see it quite frequently that happens. Um, did you know that when you met her, or is that something you found out later on?
Yeah, so I'll give you the full transparency. We met on a social dating app, so I did not know going into it. It was real casual initially, and it was in those probably the first time we met, those conversations that I found out, and we built a lot of common ground off of it. To your point, shared experience, similar position. She also has a son of a similar age, so I wasn't necessarily That wasn't like a requirement for me or the person that I was looking to date. But I will say, though, in my experience dating post divorce, that regardless of divorce or marriage, those with children seemed to be easier to build a bond, or at least be able to have a longer term connection, because they understood. People with kids understand the challenges, and the fact that your child is your number one priority. So that part I did aim for, and I did know my girlfriend had a son, at least based on her profile.
Well, that's good. So if you get married again, Jeremy, just please promise me you'll at least consider getting a prenuptial agreement. Just
I I promise.
consider. All right.
I absolutely promise. Yes, yes.
I mean, it's something I just beg people, just beg them. And then so many guys don't, and they regret it later on. Particularly, it sounds like you've got a career that continues to improve. You want to just make sure that everyone's getting married for love and not for anything else. And quite frankly,
Yes.
I always say that it's the other part of it is just to make sure everyone understands that we're all going to carry our own weight in a marriage. You've been through a divorce, so you totally understand. So,
Absolutely.
okay, so you went through this divorce for 2 years. What was it finally that got you guys to the point where you could sign off on an agreement and get divorced?
I couldn't wait to sign that. By the time they had the papers in front of me, I'll never forget my attorney looking at me. She, had been with me from the beginning, knew I didn't want this and how painful it all was. And I remember her looking at me saying, like, "Are you okay?" kind of thing. And I said, "Yeah." I wanted to grab the pen. I signed it right away. It took us and that step, that final day, we had, I forget what the formal type of, it was some type of like arbitration, but this was like some final step, and it was so we were in front of a mediator or something like that. Or I was. My ex-wife didn't even come, as her attorney. And it was so silly. Again, just no marital assets. It was all my attorney was furious this was even happening. So we get through this process. I basically have to say I'll take all the debt, whatever. It was just get it done with kind of thing. There was no debt, so it wasn't a huge deal, or a lot of it. So we get through all that. They put the papers in front of me, and that was it. The weird part is we still, and if I ask her, I don't think she can shed light. I'm not exactly sure why it took so long, why the process was that painfully long. But I do recall that final step for, you might know what it's called, John, but it was like the actual asset distribution type meeting. That was what held up the actual signatures on the divorce, and that took like the last 2 months. But yeah, I was really eager to sign at that point. Once you've been through that process, like you said, didn't want it, wished it didn't go that way, but acknowledged at that point it was happening. It was her position. There was nothing I could do. Shifted my focus and signed. And I'd love to dive into this later, but I'll highlight it now and say that it actually ended up being one of the best things that could have ever happened to me on a personal level, and what I did with my life after that point. So I don't regret any of it. But yeah, I was eager to get it done.
Well, why don't we do that right now? Why was it such a great decision, or in hindsight, that this actually that you allowed the marriage to let go of it and to move on?
Yeah, so for a number of reasons, I most importantly, my ex-wife had been with me through a number of things while we were together, tragic events, loss of a number of family members, mom and grandmom in 2 months of each other. So it had been a real rough period, and then it wasn't that much longer that the divorce started. So I say all of that to say I wasn't the best version of myself by that point, and that probably drove many of the complaints she had in the marriage. Admittedly, drinking a lot because of the loss, lots of things going on in my life that I needed to address, and probably couldn't have done so easily without taking an honest look at myself. And I don't think I would have done that if it wasn't kind of put in my face. So all of it was out there. My name was dragged through the mud. That was a shame. That hurts. But once you get over that point, you start to look to say, like, how can I make this positive? How can I better myself? So I was devastated. I was hurt, totally shook up. I was very focused on her, on the divorce, on why it was happening. And once I broke free of all that, I invested all of that energy into myself, into figuring out what I needed to do to improve myself. I look nothing like I used to look. I was never into fitness before. I was about 280 pounds while we were married, just overweight, which had ballooned throughout the process of us being together. I was a skinnier guy when we had met. So credit to her. It wasn't a physical thing. She had stuck with me throughout all that. But, I wasn't happy. And I didn't do anything about it. So this was the push. Lost all the weight. It took quite a long time. Got into fitness as a result of that. My career, at the time I was working at a different company. That probably took the biggest hit. The divorce process, affected my career more than anything. It was so hard to work on a daily basis with all of this going on. My employer at the time was great to me, very patient, understanding. And once I broke free and started addressing fitness, etc., my career started to skyrocket, multiple promotions. So it's hard to say why it turned out to be better for me. And I think it just boils down to, it forced me to focus on me and address maybe some of the things that she didn't like about me. And I wasn't doing it because she didn't like them about me, but it turns out that maybe I didn't like them about myself either. So when we talk about it now, too, we were young, which we acknowledged at the beginning. I don't know that either one of us were ready at that time, or knew what we were really getting into. So as I look at it today, I don't really even look at it as a failed type thing. We got Mason out of it. It was a big learning experience. But yes, I don't regret any of it. I am much happier now for it than I believe I would have been had things continued the way I wanted them to be.
Well, you were in your mid-20s. I
That's right.
mean, anyone who's, older than 30 knows that your 20s are, for a lot of people are just can be kind of a shit show because you're kind of all over the place. You're not quite sure what you want to do with yourself. Most people graduate college and they, still are unsure. And if you add a kid and you add a marriage into the mix, and then, you have personal tragedies that are happening. I mean, it's really a bad time. I mean, this is why, I think all things being equal, most people should really wait until they're at least 30 to get married. I mean, that's not to say you couldn't have a good relationship, but I mean, you need to sift through some of this crap first before you settle down with somebody. I'm glad to hear you took all of this positively and you made some changes to yourself physically. What did you do mentally and emotionally to kind of move forward? Was it just transformation of your body? Did that just spill over into everything else, or did you do something else after the divorce?
Yeah, no. Mentally, a lot of work needed to be done, and it's something I think we all have to be cognizant of at any point, even when we're happy. So that was the physical stuff helped, John. It did spill over into other areas. It got some confidence. It makes getting yourself out there feel a little easier. But yeah, no, I did many times. I did feel like there was still something missing. I did a number of things. I leaned on family most heavily. A select few friends, although I'd caution personally. I'd caution people. I'd say narrow down on the people that you decide to lean on, and the reason for that is a lot of times I felt like I was oversharing, or people were always willing to hear you out and be supportive, but at the end of the day, there's not much anybody can do. So I picked a few select friends and family to lean heavily on. I also did professional counseling for a brief period of time in different types of formats that I thought could benefit me, group sessions, and with mixed success. It helped. The biggest thing is just acknowledging the fact that you're struggling, acknowledging whatever feelings are there, not dismissing them, not numbing them, getting them out there. And however you do that, however I did that, which was really a lot of phone calls to the family and friends in those groups. And if it means crying in front of people, shout, whatever it was, just get those feelings out there, bounce them off of others. And it did help. And to this day, it's some I still try to follow on Facebook. I see co-parenting groups. I know we mentioned yours at the beginning of this. Those types of things are huge today. So I always try to stay on top of the mental health element of this.
Yeah, it's so important. Now, these groups that you're talking about, what kinds of groups were they?
It was yeah. I'm less involved now than I was at the time. That I had joined a something single divorced dads group on Facebook, but it was local to I want to say Pennsylvania, and you could literally interact with members. I'll have to pull the name and share it with you. So you could make Facebook friends. They had the open forum. You could post on specific topics. What I found from that wasn't necessarily talking to one specific person going through something similar. It was just knowing that there were so many people out there going through, like you said, my story is common, going through like literally the exact same thing I was going through. It's amazing how many similarities there are in these divorces, no matter how different they are.
Yeah, which is why it's so important for guys to hear people like you tell your story and to, really explain how at the time you felt your whole world was crumbling and now you look back and it was the best thing that could have happened to you. And I hear that a lot too. I mean, not everyone, lost a lot of weight and, has now become a gym buff like yourself, but like, a lot of people do make a lot of changes. Now, going back to when this all started, do you think that you should have been in any kind of individual therapy? And if not, do you think that that is something that you would recommend to a friend that's going through a divorce?
Yeah, I do, John. I do. I have an interesting view. I've used therapy throughout my life for various reasons at various times with mixed success, especially like one-on-one talk therapy. So I'll leave my personal opinions or experiences out of that. And yes, I will say that I would encourage anybody out there who's going through it, if you're not at least getting it out there and you're comfortable with the therapy route, to speak to someone. At one point, I did briefly. It wasn't well, it was a less professional route, but it was a one-on-one format. And again, if it's somebody you trust, somebody that will listen to you, simply getting it out does wonders. I to me the biggest battle throughout all of it was I found that I most often lie to myself. Like, you're going through so much, you have to keep balancing work, your child. In my case, there's so many things you have to hold yourself together for, that it's really easy to lie and like fake your way through the day and kind of just get by. But to your bigger point earlier, like, am I really happy, or am I really even acknowledging what I'm going through? And certainly you're not happy in a divorce, but am I even really doing anything to address why I'm so upset with this? So yes, be honest with yourself, and I would encourage your audience to seek any type of help they can.
Yeah, I think that is really important, to be honest with yourself and to recognize that it's okay to ask for help.
Yeah.
Most men also need to be told it's okay to cry. It's okay to feel, to be upset and to feel sad, but you can't stick your head in the ground. You just can't. I mean, a lot of times women have a much longer decision making process to get divorced. And so there's a lot of men like yourself where it kind of comes as almost a surprise. Like, why is this happening? Um, but you can't feel bad about it for too long. You've got to, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and figure out a way to really move forward. And therapy might be good. These groups are good. All the forums that are out there where you can interact with other guys is important. Listening to stories like yours is so important, just to know that it's all going to be okay. So be that as it may, let's take you back pre-divorce. If you could go back and tell your younger self something, or give your younger self some advice, what would it be?
Yeah, I always struggle with that one. So as it relates to the divorce or relationship, would you give yourself the warning? And the answer is no. I wouldn't change anything as it happened. It's a shame. The negative side of it ending is a shame. But we have a beautiful gift. We have Mason out of this, and you get this extremely. I was young. I'm 31 now, still young, but I was very young when I was going through that. I got some life experience out of it, not in the way I'd wanted to get it. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned what I expect and need from relationships moving forward, what I need to do better in relationships. What I would tell myself, John, um, especially as it relates to the divorce, is to let it happen. And what I mean by that is, I think the biggest mistake that I made, um, as the divorce had already, once we got to a point where the divorce is happening, is that you try to be in control. I tried really hard to be in control in any area I could. And I don't mean controlling or like that as a negative. I mean, I wanted to do something. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to make it better. I wanted her to know I don't want it to be this way. And I think what I ended up doing was probably like, smothering her unintentionally. And that if I didn't do that, would it have worked? Probably not. Like, it doesn't change the outcome. But I don't think it's worth focusing all your efforts initially on like what you can do to solve anything between you and your spouse at that point. So I guess the advice I'd give is just let it happen, take it as it comes, and slow down a bit.
Those are excellent pieces of advice. And let it happen. I've never heard it quite like that, but I think that's a great way of putting it. Once one person in a marriage wants a divorce, unfortunately, you're going to get divorced.
Yep.
I mean, that's just how it is. It's not how it's always been, but that's how it is. And, you can either make the best of it, or you can feel sorry for yourself. I mean, I just spoke to a guy yesterday who is on the verge of his wife getting divorced and getting everything she wants because he didn't even participate in the process because he thought, oh, she'll come back to me. She'll come back to me. She's just doing this because, her friend told her to do it or her mother told her to do it. And it's really important that you have that, don't lie to yourself, as you just pointed out. Look at yourself in the mirror and realize, listen, this sucks. I hate it, but this is what she wants. I care about her. So guess what? I'm going to have to make the best of it. And you've got to have those conversations with yourself. Lean on family. I'm with you on the friends part. I tell everyone that I work with, just be careful about, listening to your friends too much because they love you and they're going to tell you things that sometimes are so out there that they can really make you feel uncomfortable because then you have to go back to them and tell them, oh, well, I only agreed to X, Y, and Z. And it just creates a very awkward situation. And just, listen, come onto like an online forum and put it out there to guys that you don't really know very well and see what they say. That's always a better option than getting your friends involved. But that's just my opinion. I think you don't have a terribly different one because you said keep that circle small.
Yeah.
But as you know, Jeremy, a lot of guys don't feel comfortable talking to their friends about their personal life. They just don't. When you're at the gym or you're playing golf or something, you don't really want to talk about your divorce and what's going on. I mean, you might want to complain about how much money it's costing, how much money you're paying, but you don't want to sit and talk about like why'd your marriage fail, because we don't like to talk about failure. No one does. But you know what? It's kind of important, as you pointed out. You learn from your marriage or from your marriage that didn't work. Learn from it. Figure out what you need out of a relationship, because then the next time it might actually be a great marriage that is the last one you have to deal with. So I think that's just absolutely wonderful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jeremy, do you have any final words for people listening about what life is like now as a divorced man?
No, I guess just to put a bow on it, like, the whole theme of this, when I was going through it and it was a rough point in my life, I honestly thought life would never be like it was at that moment again. And it takes a long time and it changes so much. So my final advice is be very patient with yourself, but please know you will find your way and it will absolutely get better if you believe it. You have to start making those steps to get yourself where you want to be. But in my experience, it's not only as good as it was, it's better today. So, yep.
You've got so much wisdom. It's amazing that you're only 31. A
Thank
ton of
you.
wisdom, Jeremy. But you know what? Divorce, particularly when you're young and you get divorced, it has a way of making you grow up a lot faster and learning a lot of things that take a lot of other guys decades to learn. I mean, there's guys that get divorced in their 50s and 60s that probably are so envious that you were able to turn it into what you turned it into, because it's hard for a lot of people. But I'm glad that people are going to hear that, it can be a very positive thing, retrospectively, even if it really sucks when you're going through it. So thank you so much for being here and telling your story.
Thanks so much for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And we'll see you next time.